dear colleagues, good afternoon. I will kindly ask you come to the conference room. We will follow with the program of today's conference. And now it's the time for the last panel of the conference, as we used to say, last but not least. And I'm really very glad that the first panelist will be distinguished researcher from the Pavol Jozef Šafárik University in Košice, Associated Professor Peter Borza, who will, in his paper, present for the Slovak point of view, very important personality, Bishop Pavel Peter Gojdič. So, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you for intro here, and I'm glad for speak about Bishop Pavel Gojdič from Prešov, from Slovakia, Czechoslovakia before. And the story is about famous bishop and bishop during Second World War, and communist regime is like hero. The November Revolution in 1989, which marked the fall of the communist regime, gave space to the representatives of the Greek Catholic Church in Czechoslovakia to freely express their demands on December 4. The Assembly of Clergy issued a statement agreeing to the demands of the Civic Forum and the Public Against Violence. They also formulated their own demands. One of them was the rehabilitation of Bishop Pavel Gojdič, and others unjustly prosecuted and convicted by the communist regime. The fact that the name of the bishop was the first demand was not a coincidence, but a reflection of the general awareness of the importance of his personality and merits for Greek Catholics. In the 1990s, his fate was known primarily among Christians in Czechoslovakia. Shortly after assuming the presidency, President Václav Havel on October 28, 1991, awarded him the Order of Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk second class in memoriam, which recognized his struggle for religious freedom and democracy. The name of the bishop gradually became better known thanks to the ongoing and in 2001 completed beatification process in Rome in the square of St. Peter. Inclusion in the list of the blessed enabled his cult in Slovakia and the Czech Republic, and among Greek Catholics in the world, especially in the United States. During his beatification, his role in the fight against communism, his loyalty to Pope and the Church was emphasized. Bishop Gojdič also took important position towards fascism, another totalitarian regime of the 20th century. In 2007, the state of Israel honored his role in saving Jews in Slovakia by awarding him the Rights Among the Nations Award in memoriam. His struggle with fascism is illustrated by the interpretation of the main Christian commandment by Bishop Gojdič and comparison with the explanation of the same commandment by the president of the Slovak state, Jozef Tiso. During a speech in Holič in 1942, he said that because of our love for each other, we should eliminate the enemy, that is the Jews. Bishop Gojdič expressed the opposite when he said that love for God obliges as to help Jews. Gojdič's critical attitude towards the politics of the Slovak state was manifested in January 1939 when he issued a pastoral letter condemning racial politics and warning priests against involvement in this political direction. Since the creation of the Slovak state, he faced the hostility of the regime, but also of part of the Greek Catholic Church clergy, who relied in the support of the government and demanded his replacement. Thanks to the constant support of the Holy See, Bishop Gojdič was able to work in Slovakia until the end of the Second World War. And with his personal attitudes represented by statements and deeds, together with priests and believers, he helped save several hundred Jews. Bishop's attitudes in favor of the Jewish and later his support of the resistance did not go unnoticed after the end of the war and resonated in society. In government circles, the name Gojdič was associated with the epithet anti-fascist fighter. General Ludvík Svoboda gave him Mercedes car for the needs of the bishopric. The president of the Republic, Edvard Beneš, on the occasion of the third anniversary of the Slovak National Uprising on August 29, awarded 19 Greek Catholic priests for the outstanding services for the liberation of the Czechoslovak Republic. 3 were awarded the Czechoslovak War Cross in 1939. And the other 16 were awarded the Czechoslovak Medal for Merit First Degree. However, the period of prosperity was short-lived and was replaced by discrediting campaign directed against the Greek Catholic Church and its bishop. Gojdič's brave stand during the war was long forgotten, but he remained consistent even in the face of the new totalitarian communist regime. In August 1948, in front of the commander of the Secret Service in Prešov, Captain Kubik, he expressed himself with the Church cannot agree with your regime, with the communists, because you are materialists and atheists. The reason for the change was Moscow's plan to strengthen its influence in Czechoslovakia through the Orthodox Church after the successful liquidation of the Greek Catholic Church. The Orthodox Church was supposed to take over its believers and structure. The operation was supposed to take place in a legitimate way according to the model of the liquidation of the Union in Lviv. Moscow managed to dominate the Orthodox Church by installing bishops and annexing it under the Moscow Patriarchate. Several signals from abroad warned of the impending danger for Greek Catholic Church in Czechoslovakia. The liquidation of the Greek Catholic Church at the False Council of Lviv in 1946 led Gojdič and the leadership of the Church to be worried, but their trust in democratic Czechoslovakia strengthened. Their belief that such a thing could not happen in the restored republic. However, Bishop Gojdič asked Rome for auxiliary bishop, which Vasil Hopko became. A much more serious event was the arrest of the Prague parish priest Basilian Pankratius Hučko in March 1947 and the accusation of supporting the Ukrainian insurgent army. The murder of Mukachevo bishop Theodor Romja on the November 1st, 1947 marked a turning point in Bishop Gojdič's perception of reality. Specifically, state security raids against Greek Catholics, monks and nuns in July 1948 already led him to protest to the President of the Republic and implement important measures. First of all, he supported the intensive catechesis of the faithful so that they could face the new conditions. He also took concrete steps in organizing the church in situation when the bishop and other church representatives would be remote. He created a system of transferring jurisdiction and named specific persons as his representatives. The well-established system had a crack in that the state security intensively worked out the leadership of the Greek Catholic Church, and one of the possible successors sided with the communist regime. On the day of the fake council, the director of the episcopal office, Jan Kokinčák, voluntarily handed over the keys to the episcopal office and later became one of the members of the leadership of the Orthodox Church. Bishop Gojdič's plan was therefore known. In 1950, after the fake council of Prešov, both Bishop Gojdič and Hopko were arrested, as well as another representative, Mikuláš Rusnák. But Michal Szabados fled to Hungary. However, the format of successors continued despite the revelation when auxiliary bishop Vasil Hopko appointed priest Ivan Ljavinec to the position of vicar general during his internment in Hlohovec. Ljavinec acquired jurisdiction over the entire Greek Catholic Church and actively exercised it for the next 5 years until his arrest. In cooperation with the priest, he ensured the operation of the Greek Catholic Church in secret. From the beginning, Bishop Gojdič faced pressure to transfer to the Orthodox Church, which he refused. In a monastery trial, he was sentenced to life in prison together with 2 other Slovak bishops. His personal testimony played a fundamental role in the decisions of priests and especially believers who were officially transferred to the Orthodox Church by the state. The only way to express dissent was the refuse an Orthodox priest in the parish to practice religious acts independently or to practice to Catholic faith by receiving sacraments from the Roman Catholic Church. Part of the faithful and priest yielded to the pressure of the regime and accepted the new conditions in the Orthodox Church. The activity of Ivan Ljavinec was focused on them, who achieved the return of several clergy and believers back to loyalty to the Pope. After his arrested on April 2028, Bishop Gojdič found himself in isolation in Slavik's villa in Štrbské Pleso, from where he was escorted to the monastery in Báč in June, where he was detained for a week, and then he was placed in the prison in Valdice. In September, he was transferred to the Ruzin in Prague, where he, along with other bishops, was subject to cruel torture and preparation for a trial against treasonous bishops, which was approved in advance by the Security Commission of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Czechoslovakia. The monster trial took place on January in Bratislava, where 3 Catholic bishops, Pavel Gojdič, Michal Buzalka and Jan Vojtašák, appeared before the state court in Bratislava. Among the absurd accusation against the Bishop Gojdič, that were heard during the staged trial was the accusation of collaboration with Germany and the regime of the Slovak state. During the fabricated political trial in Bratislava, he declared his innocence, but the sentence had already been decided by the leadership of the Communist Party. He completed his life sentence in Valdice, Leopoldov, Ilava, and again in Leopoldov. The conditions of the communist prison have already been described by several authors, whether it was the memories of political prisoners or the analysis of historians who agreed on the continued dehumanization and torture of political convicts. Prisoner Gojdič had to adapt to the prison rules and the approach of the guards. In his favor was the monastic experience and a community of political prisoners that supported each other. In a painful environment, the presence of fellow priests, Christians, and people of good will was a rare source of strength to overcome the hardships of prison life. In an effort to preserve his personal identity, the bishop devoted time to prayer, the service of the sacrament of reconciliation for fellow prisoners, and the modest celebration of Sunday liturgy. These activities were very dangerous because their discovery was followed by punishment. For example, the Redemptorist Metok Domini Trčka was sent to correction for singing a prayer during Christmas and died as a result. Gojdič also underwent punishment for serving Sunday liturgies. Chief Sikora in Ilava wrote about him. From a cultural and political point of view, he does not show in activity in favor of socialist education. He appears hostile to our institution in the sense that he tries to introduce to the ideology of obscurantism among the prisoners in various ways. He devotes his free time only to prayer and various unhealthy talks that are harmful to our establishment. He associates only with convicts who do not want our people's democratic establishment. He does not admit to criminal activity and says that what he did it out of human and religious feeling for his neighbor, not with the intention of subversion. In prison, together with others, he was able to organize a secret priestly ordination and treated his fellow prisoners in collegial manner with a sincere interest in their faith. They tried to help him in every possible way, also because he was often sick. A fellow inmate from Ilava, the prominent academic painter Erwin Fow, known for his artistic rendering of glass vases, wrote a testimony about him. In April 1956, they met in the prison hospital where Fow worked as a nurse, and Bishop Gojdič found himself there as a patient. He remembered this period with the words, "During that period of fellowship with Bishop Gojdič, I recognized his great human qualities as a true supporter of activity love for one's neighbor. From the gifts he received, he always gave to all those who had nothing or who received nothing from anyone. He even distributed his monthly pocket money to the poor. Gojdič always received remittance from his sister, but he never used them only for himself. During his recovery, he offered me as a nurse his assistance where physical help was needed. He went from bed to bed and had an ear for all the mental troubles of his fellow prisoners. He did not make any distinctions between people. Everyone was equal to him. He assisted me very well he could and tried to help with the daily cleaning of the patients' rooms. In this situation, the greatness of Bishop Gojdič's soul was truly shown when he sat for hours on the edge of the bed of despairing man and won him back to hope and trust. Tirelessly and uncaring for himself, he often went from bed to help others as a true advocate of Christian law for his neighbor and set an example for him. He was usually placed in the department for priests and clergy, which fellow prisoners called the Vatican. Prison management created a separate department so that they would not influence other prisoners. Connections with the outside world was ensured by limited correspondence with brother Stefan and sister Helena. In the censored letters, he was interested in the relatives and fellow brothers of the Basilians and priests. He could reveal little about his life in prison and so often stated that he was reconciled to his fate, that he saw his stay in prison as the fulfillment of God's will and that he was internally balanced and peaceful. He also used the time to read literature from the prison library. He read in German and Hungarian, for example, Black House by Charles Dickens. Naturally, the censored correspondence lacks mentions of the authentic conditions in the prison, but his desire for letters or the most detailed depiction of life outside the prison testify to the anxiety and loneliness he experienced that do belong to prison life. The bishop tried to review the process in 1956 and with great hope expected an amnesty in 1960. However, he was already suffering from an incurable disease as a result of his imprisonment, to which he succumbed on his birthday, July 7, 1916. Prison and communist regime officials feared his influence even after his death. Therefore, they refused to hand over the body to the family, and he was buried in the prison cemetery in Leopoldo in grave number 681. After his death, fellow prisoners realized the significance of his death, spontaneously titled him a martyr, and took care of his grave so that it would not fall into oblivion. The coffin was equipped with a small window for the identification during exhumation. This was achieved in 1968 after the restoration of the Greek Catholic Church in Czechoslovakia. His remains were taken by fellow Basilians and priests to the Cathedral Church in Prešov, where they very briefly exposed to the worship of the faithful. Because of their large number, communist officials ordered their storage in a crypt and restricted public access. Even though the publication of information about Bishop Gojdič was banned, all the time his memory and testimony of loyalty to the Pope lived on among the clergy and believers. This was reflected in the public statement of the clergy with which I began my contribution. Today, the personality of Bishop Gojdič is the subject of the cult, but at the same time, he is an important merit of the attitudes of priests and believers towards the exercise of freedom, democracy, and human rights. Thank you.
I would like to thank you, Peter, for your contribution and introduction of very strong and very important personality of Bishop Gojdič, and we will very fluently follow your paper with the paper dedicated to Martyr for Faith, Bishop Kazimirs Dulbinskis, who will be introduced by Dr. Solveiga Krumina-Konkova from the University of Latvia. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, my presentation today is dedicated to the Bishop Kazimirs Dulbinskis. As you can say from his name, he is Polish origin. So I think that it will be, my paper will be especially interesting for our Polish colleagues because of this reason. In March 1984, the Latvian exile newspaper issued in Australia described him as the greatest martyr in occupied Latvia. Today we could undoubtedly characterize him as one of the his life as one of the most outstanding examples of spiritual resistance against the Soviet occupation regime and its anti-religious politics. To understand what it means to live in the occupied territory occupied by the Soviet Union, I suggest to imagine the hell on the earth. Bishop Dulbinskis later wrote that if we compare Gulag camps and hell on the earth, that the hell is the better place to live as to be in the Gulag. And but at the beginning, I briefly say some words about his early years of life. He was born on 1906 in Latgale in Flandria. It is east part of Latvia on the borders of Belarus and Russia. And from 1915 to 1919, he studied in several elementary schools in Latgale, where the learning language was Russian, because this territory was territory where Latgalian language was forbidden by Russian regime. From 1922 up to 1927, he studied at the Aglona Gymnasium, and after they choose to continue their theological education and entered the Riga Theological Seminary and graduated the seminary in 1932. On May 1932, Archbishop Antoni Springović ordained him as a priest, and the first place of service of the new priest was the Church of the Jesus Heart in Rezekne. This is also a place in Latgale, one of the famous place of Latgale. In 1933, he was sent to serve in Aizpūre on the Russian border, and he was entrusted with important tasks to establish a congregation in Aizpūre and to continue building the church, the foundation of which were laid in 1931. He completed both of these tasks. And like many young clergymen in the interwar period, Dulbinskis was actively involved in forming the newly independent state and its society. From 1935, he was a member and chairman of the Central Board of the Latvian Catholic Youth Society and the editor of the organization's magazine, and also wrote in this and other Catholic editions about religious, educational, and youth social life issues. From 1936 to 1938, Dulbinskis was the dean of the parish of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Daugavpils, as well as worked as a religious education teacher at several vocation schools in Daugavpils, and for a while fulfilled the duties of acting director of the Daugavpils Women Handcraft Work School Saule. Here you can see the students of this women's handcraft work school, and Dulbinskis were among those students. From September 1, 1938, he was approved as the inspector of the Aglona Gymnasium, and when the Faculty of Roman Catholic Theology of the University of Latvia was founded in July 1938, Dulbinskis also started studying in its 6th year, and despite his serious duties at the Aglona Gymnasium, he successfully completed his studies on February 7, 1940. After the Soviet occupation in summer 1940, the Aglona Gymnasium was closed, and Dulbinskis began serving in several parishes in Latgale. In 1942, he returned to Daugavpils, to the parish of the Blessed Virgin Mary, where he served until 1945, when he was invited to Riga to assume the responsibilities of the inspector of the Riga Theological Seminary. For Dulbinskis, exactly the 30s were the years of his most active social life and rapidly growing popularity, especially among the younger generation of Catholics, and not only in Latgale. The colossal popularity of Dulbinskis was to become one of the means for strengthening and uniting the congregations around the church leadership after 1944, when the Soviet occupation power resumed its anti-religious policy. On July 25, 1947, Archbishop Antonis Springović consecrated Kazimirs Dulbinskis as a bishop, and he began to perform the duties of Vicar General. It should be noted that the commissioner of the Council of Religious Cults of the USSR in the Latvian SSR did not formally recognize this appointment. As my colleague Mara Kjope told us yesterday, this ordination was only in the situation of silence from the side of Vatican. And despite of attitude of the Soviet authorities, Dulbinskis actively began to fulfill the work entrusted to him to strengthen the Catholic believers' trust in God in a very problematic existential situation where the practicing of religion at all had made them enemies of the Soviet regime. During a year and a half, Dulbinskis visited 36 parishes. The visitations of him were greeted with excitement in the congregations. His popularity among the faithful and his efforts to prevent the liquidation of congregations and closing churches were not liked by the Soviets, and in the reports to Moscow by Commissioner we can find that there are indications that after such visits the activity of the congregation increased. Therefore, it is not surprised that the reasons were sought for his arrest. And Dulbinskis was arrested on May 12, 1949. During this time, the bishop served in the St. Jacob's Cathedral in Riga, and the fact that Czechists found their issues or the magazines published in the interwar years is often named as the main reason for his arrest. From the materials of Dulbinskis' criminal case, it can be concluded that this was only one of the reasons for his arrest. He was also accused of anti-Soviet activities during the period until 1940. That is, his activities in Scout organization, Latvian Catholic Youth Society, as well as his activities and help in People's Help organization during the occupation of Nazi Germany and anti-Soviet activities after the war. Several protocols of Dulbinskis' interrogation show that the investigators were particularly interested in his, as we can read, criminal connections with the Vatican and the nationalist underground. It should be noted that Dulbinskis' criminal file contains a document entitled Memorandum of Agency Materials, which shows that Dulbinskis' charge of anti-Soviet activities was based on the reports of 10 agents. This means that Dulbinskis was observed and the evidence for his arrest was collected probably over several years. Dulbinskis himself testifies about how the interrogation was conducted in his submission to the Prosecutor General of the USSR on the February 1955. During the investigation, I was kept in the internal prison of the Ministry of State Security of the Latvian SSR, mostly in the basement in solitary confinement. I sat in solitary confinement for 6.5 months. Several times, up to 6 days without a break, I was not allowed to sleep, tortured with insomnia. It gave me a heart attack. The interrogation protocols also show that Dulbinskis did not admit his guilty in any of the episodes of the accusation. But despite the torture and psychological pressure of Dulbinskis, the interrogators failed to force him to name any of his accomplices. For example, the investigators tried to get him to admit that Archbishop Springović had secret connections with the Vatican. However, Dulbinskis did not name either Springović or anyone else. On November 26, 1949, at a special hearing at the Ministry of State Security of USSR, so-called Troika, Dulbinskis was convicted under famous articles 58.3 and 58.10, Part 1 of the Criminal Code of Russian Federation, and was sentenced to 10 years in a correctional institution, serving his sentence in a special regime camp in Mineralny, better known as Minlag. I can say that Minlag is the worst place in all the Gulag system. It is specially developed for the political prisoners from so-called new occupied territories of the Soviet Union. It's mean from the Baltic states and from the West Ukraine. And the conditions for the political prisoners, yes, they were something similar. The best conditions as in the hell, in the cold of Siberia, sometimes with the week without any food, with unhuman work conditions, and the most part of the prisoners from this camp did not return to home after his sentence time, because they died in this camp. What means these two articles from the famous articles of 58. Point 3 cover the following offenses which is connected with counter-revolutionary purposes. But according to point 1 of the Article 58, it means every action which is realized against the power of the workers and peasant Soviets against the government of the USSR or Soviet republics, and not only in the reality, but only if you only think about such actions in your mind. And Article 58.10 in its turn covered anti-Soviet and counter-revolutionary propaganda and agitation, which means also sometimes the speeches during the workshop, religious services, theological texts, publications in journals during the interwar time, and so on, so on. It's mean also very different possibilities to use this article for the fight against political enemies. It is interesting that Dulbinskis was not told anything about the decision of the hearing until December 1, 1950. It means that he spent almost a year in the internal prison of the Ministry of the State Security of the Latvian SSR, knowing nothing about his future fate. According to the KGB archive documents, it was connected with a secret operation carried out by the Ministry of State Security, the so-called agency combination, to gather facts about the anti-Soviet activities of Latvian Roman Catholic leaders. Here you can see these documents, and the last slide is the correspondence between, will be the documents about letters between the different subjects of state security services in Soviet time. Dulbinskis wrote about this time that he was fully isolated both from the outside world and from other detainees. This is evidenced by a letter from the internal correspondence of the Soviet security authorities. They write that prior to sending him to the camp, place him in a solitary cell, isolated from other defendants, and deprived him of any connection with other people. Therefore, it is no wonder that the conviction that Bishop Kazimirs Dulbinskis is dead is getting more assertive in Latvia and the Catholic community in exile. The isolation of Dulbinskis from Latvian Roman Catholic Church also continued in later years. In the fall of 1954, Dulbinskis was released from detention due to amnesty. However, as evidenced by the correspondence between the security authorities of the Latvian SSR and the USSR, his return to Latvia was considered undesirable. However, Dulbinskis returned to Latvia in 1955 and resumed his duties as a bishop, again visiting parishes. Undoubtedly, the local authorities were far from satisfied with his activities. At their request, the Prosecutor General of the USSR protested the decision to release Dulbinskis from the confinement, and in March 1957 he was arrested again and remained in detention until November 1958. After the second release, Dulbinskis was forbidden to return to Latvia until 1964. During that time, he lived near the borders with Latvia. First, just across the river Daugava in Belarusian SSR, then already in the Russian Federation, in Verkhnye Dvinsk and Pitalovo. There are reports that he worked as a farmer and construction craftsman on the Soviet farms, in a boxes making workshop, and as a woodcutter in a bakery. As can be easily imagined, that Latvian periodicals of that time were silent about Dulbinskis, but the press in exile wrote that Bishop Dulbinskis was deported from Belarus to Siberia by the communists, but he did not survive this deportation and died on the way. It means that Latvians and Catholics abroad they had no any information about the destiny of their bishop. But what about church leadership? After Archbishop...
Sorry, just ask you for conclusion, like 2 minutes,
yes,
please.
After Archbishop Springovich died in 1958, Bishop Peter Strots nominated Dulbinskis as his successor, but without any answer from the side of Soviet authorities. And Dulbinskis was allowed to return in Latvia only in 1964, but he was forbidden to serve as a bishop, not only as a bishop but also as a priest. And his rehabilitation was only in 1988 when he was already 83 years old and very ill, and then they had no possibility to serve as a bishop or serve the church at all. What can I say in the conclusion? The most conclusion is that Bishop Kazimirs Dulbinskis was the only one bishop from so-called Soviet time which had no any compromise with the Soviet regime. All other bishops of that time have different compromises with the Soviet regimes, and the most of them also, as we know currently, were the agencies of the KGB. So we can say that Bishop Kazimirs Dulbinskis was really the example of martyr and example how it is possible not to deny belief and principles and be honestly not only in front of the God, but also in front of the people and in front of believers of Catholic Church. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech and for your presentation. And after the introducing of the phase of 2 bishops and martyrs, now the floor is open for Dr. Stipe Kljaić from Croatian Institute of History and his presentation named Apostolic Nuncio John Hurley and the split between the Soviet Union and Communist Yugoslavia.
The subject matter of my paper deals with the Apostolic Nuncio, John Patrick Hurley. Unlike many other bishops and the priests who has mentioned here, he was not a martyr, he was not a man of persecution. But Monsignor Hurley contributed very much for the church behind the Iron Courtain, especially for the church in Croatia, as we will see in my paper. To understand better the life and the work of Monsignor Hurley, I decided to show whole biography of him because it's not easy to understand his work and his position in this time without referring to the whole biography. What is important to mention for Monsignor Hurley is that he was a very important, very significative and distinguished figure of the American Catholicism and the Universal Church as well. Hurley was born in Cleveland, Ohio, to a family of Irish immigrants. After finishing theological studies, he was ordained as a priest in the domestic diocese in Cleveland, where was a parish priest sometime. Very soon after that, in 1927, he took the diplomatic service of the Holy See to work as the secretary at diplomatic delegation in India, where was invited by Edward Mooney, his former professor. He continued to be a diplomat of the Holy See, staying in Japan from 1933 to 1934 as a charge d'affaires of the Apostolic delegation in that country. As a reward for Asian diplomatic mission, Pope Pius XI assigned him the title of domestic prelate in order to be as an official in the state secretariat of the Holy See in the second half of the 30s. Since then, he became a special kind between the American Catholic hierarchy and the Holy See. Afterwards, it occurred his promotion when he was appointed to be the bishop of the Diocese of St. Augustine in Florida in 1940. Considering the disagreements of the American episcopate during the beginning, at the beginning of the Second World War, Monsignor Hurley advocated interventionism. Hence, Catholic hierarchy was divided into two groups. One of the groups stood for isolationism, and the other group was supported interventionism. That is to say, entering America into the war. He believed that the greatest threat to America was the National Socialism of Hitler's Germany. For this reason, he was also critical of the papacy of Pius XII, Pope Pacelli, for not being anti-Nazi enough. At the time, American Catholicism was largely opposed to entering the war, and especially to be on the British side, because of the large number of prelates and the clergy was coming from Irish descendants like Hurley. He thought in a different way, believing that America must not be isolated of the European war and should also not to go into an alliance with Germany against the Soviet Union. As a greater supporter of Roosevelt's administration during the war and the Democrat by political commitment, Hurley was criticized by other Catholic prelates in America, who constantly warned him to be more distant from the political world. As a Catholic bishop, he envisioned that America may be a great power that can save both the world and the church from the penetration of communism. He expressed Patriotism as well as diplomatic service brought him into close contact with American political and war establishment. Firmly believed that the alliance between the Vatican and America would overcome the challenge of communism on a global scale. John Patrick Hurley was the first American clergyman in the Vatican diplomacy who was officiating in the rank of the nuncio. His service in Yugoslavia did not last long. Only 3 years from February 46 to July 49. However, at the time, it was happened very important events for the subsequent history of the Cold War and Yugoslavia itself. The famous speech of the British Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, held in Fulton on March 5th, 1946, about the lowering of the Iron Curtain, which would announce the beginning of the conflict between the former war allies, between Western and the Eastern Bloc. Then the trial against the Archbishop of Zagreb, Alojzije Stepinac, which was headed by the communist authorities in the fall of the 46. In the same year, a socialist constitution was adopted in Yugoslavia as a blueprint of the Stalin one enacted in the Soviet Union 10 years ago. The Holy See made an alliance with America against global communism in the Italian elections in 1946, when they engaged together in an effort to prevent Italy from becoming another communist country. How strong the pressure of communism was in Italy was evidenced by its later name, l'Isola della Rivoluzione, like an island of revolution, during the entire Cold War. It was a common victory of America and the Vatican in the combat against increasingly penetrating communism. And finally, the quarreling of the Moscow and the world communism with the Yugoslav communists, and eventually the decree against communism signed by Pius XII, according to which it had forbidden the possible membership of the Catholics in any communist movements and parties. Only in such a context we can understand Hurley's mission in Yugoslavia. Hurley was a representative of a policy of cooperation between the USA and the Vatican to shape world after 1945, when Nazism and the fascism had been collapsed. Therefore, international communism would become the only enemy of both sides. After the takeover of power by the communists in Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Poland, until 1949, the only diplomatic papal representation remained in Yugoslavia. However, it will not last long either, because just 3 years after Hurley's dismissal, diplomatic relations between the Vatican and Yugoslavia would be broken due to the decision of Pope Pius XII to declare Alojzije Stepinac to be the new cardinal of the Roman Church. Before arriving into Yugoslavia, Hurley had no knowledge of the religious, political, and the cultural circumstances in the Yugoslav territory. He was not an expert on the Yugoslav issues at all. The motives for his appointment were actually an attempt of the Vatican diplomacy to ensure influence in Europe through the American military and political presence reached since 1945. That was why his ideal choice was precisely Hurley, who didn't know the Yugoslav situation very well. It was decisive that he had firm contacts in the American war establishment. After all, before coming to his post in Belgrade in the winter of 1946, Hurley held some preparative meetings in the War Department with American officials about Yugoslavia, and the American intelligence service welcomed his appointment with approval. Appointing him on this influential position, they got an American more behind the Iron Curtain. It has been very indicative that his biographer, Christopher Gallagher, in the book Vatican Secret Diplomacy, didn't record that Hurley had ever informed the Vatican about this. At that meeting, certainly not by accident, he met the military attaché in Yugoslavia, Louis Fortier. As well, Monsignor Montini, on behalf of the State Secretary of the Holy See, also advised him to cooperate with allies, and especially with American diplomatic staff in the Belgrade. Myron Taylor, which was the personal emissary of President Roosevelt to the Holy See, had accurately described the type of cooperation that Washington intended to receive from Monsignor Hurley. Open quotation mark, Myron Taylor's wrote, the papal diplomat could have carefully observed relation between Tito and Stalin, and they worked secretly to promote the position of the United States in that area. Hurley's mission, therefore, represented only one component of the complex Vatican strategy aimed at involving Washington in a common alliance against communism. In the correspondence with the Holy See, it was no coincidence that Hurley had been using the American diplomatic post in Belgrade. Veniva spedita a Roma attraverso il corriere diplomatico della locale ambasciata statunitense, as it says in the original document written in Italian. Hurley was a man of trust, not only by the Holy See, but also by the USA itself. The culture, politics, history, and religious diversity of the Yugoslav area were terra incognita for Bishop St. Augustine in Florida. The Vatican, however, did not ask for cultural sensitivity. By appointing Hurley to Yugoslavia, the Holy See was looking for someone who could cooperate smoothly with the Americans in the overall struggle against communism. On the other hand, American politics imagined the Catholic Church as an important ally in establishing a new order on the European continent, just like was their common work in suppression of communism to taking over Italy. In one document from the Vatican Apostolic Archives, which is a deal with the Hurley private papers, writes, Taylor ha quindi la possibilità di inviare rapporti al presidente Truman sulla terribile situazione in Jugoslavia sulla base delle informazioni ricevute proprio da Hurley. Taylor promised Truman a full report on the Yugoslav situation, adding that he was being added to the fullest extent by Hurley. This, of course, he assured the president, will be done in a most secret and a confidential way. Hurley encountered a very difficult situation in the church, in the Catholic Church in Yugoslavia, as the power of the Yugoslav communist partisans grew and as their territorial control expanded during the war, so did the repression against the Catholic clergy was getting worse. It reached a peak in the years of 1944 and 1945, lasting until 1948, when the Inform Bureau clashed with the Yugoslav communists. Over 300 Croatian Catholic priests and the monks were killed in the Yugoslav Communist Revolution. Almost the vast majority of them was tortured and went through prisons in the post-war period. The numbers of the suffering of the Croatian church are comparable to the suffering of the Polish and the Spanish church in the 20th century, considering the proportion in their population. Other Catholic believers suffered also in the massive repression, and the members of the intellectual class among the laity in particular. By 1948, the Yugoslav regime was considered the most Stalinist system in the entire Eastern Bloc, and the Yugoslav communists were the most loyal to the Soviet Union and Stalin himself. The goal of the Tito's regime was to limit the church to the influence of the sacristy, of the chapel, to completely expel it from the public, cultural, scientific, and the political life of the country, so to speak, to push everything underground. The crown was the trial against Archbishop of Zagreb, Alojzije Stepinac, in September 1946, at which Hurley personally attended. In addition to communist propaganda, the Serbian Orthodox Church, led by Patriarch Gavrilo, participated in the agitation against Stepinac as well. In the first reception at the Tito's office on January 21st, 1946, Hurley had to wait an hour before coming in. It was a demonstration of Tito's unlimited power over the country and the humiliating position of the Catholic Church in the revolutionary period. At that meeting, Tito demanded that Hurley was to remove Stepinac to Rome, otherwise he would be brought before the court, which later happened in the second half of the same year, when neither Stepinac nor Hurley agreed to Stepinac going outside of the country. This is how Hurley recorded the first impressions of Tito. Tiger, Tito's first policy dog, was my companion. I sat and said the rosary. the joyful mysteries, and the smile and the countdown. Tito was the evil commander of the Yugoslav Red Horde. According to his religious philosophy, Tito, a Croatian whose mother once wished him to become a priest, could never, as a baptized Roman Catholic, perpetrate such a vicious persecution upon his co-religionists. In Hurley's mind, Tito was the personification of evil and had no claim to Catholicity. According to reports, his partisans had already executed innumerable priests by firing squad. Privately, Hurley aligned Tito with all the worst of his early prejudice. Who is Tito? He asked himself, a Ukrainian Jew. Hurley's cooperation with the American ambassador to Yugoslavia, Cavendish Cannon, during the crisis in the relation between Moscow and the Yugoslav communists is the best example of his close ties with American official policy. He also played an important role in the formulation of American policy after the conflict between the Soviets and the Yugoslavs, as can be seen from his letters addressed to the State Secretariat of the Holy See in 1948, respectively to Monsignor Domenico Tardini. In them, he introduced him to the current situation in Yugoslavia. In this letter, Hurley spoke to Domenico Tardini the following sentences. This country is now boycotted by the confirmed states, and there is a danger that an economic collapse may smooth the way for a coup d'etat, which will bring into power a pro-Soviet regime. It's in the interest of Western Europe and of the United States to prevent that if possible. Our conservation lasted 2 hours. At the end, Mr. Cannon expressed his entire agreement with what I had said and thanked me very cordially for my frankness with him. He said that he realized clearly that I was speaking entirely on my own responsibility. He gave me the impression, without saying it, in so many words that the State Department had instructed him to explore the general situation with me. The new line of Tito's regime after 1948, which went towards the West and the cooperation with America, did not allow Hurley to stay there anymore, as his mission no longer made sense because Yugoslavia became America's communist ally. Hurley had to come back home. After gaining the Yugoslav experience, Hurley became even more anti-communist than before. He was disappointed with the Democratic Party in America, by then which he sympathized so much because it was not aware of the communist danger to American society. He saw his withdrawal from Yugoslavia and American support for Tito's communist dictatorship as another failure after Tehran and Yalta, when Eastern Europe and the Baltics were left to Stalin's Soviet Union. Contrary to it, he thought that American support for Yugoslavia would lead to the dismantling of communism and the fall of the communist dictatorship, but such scenario did not happen. The Americans were too cautious and did not demand major concessions of the Tito's regime in terms of democratization. They decided on a minimalist policy, and it was only important for them to weaken the monolithic nature of the Soviet bloc. A later report by the famous American diplomat George Kennan in Yugoslavia in 1962 gives a brief summary of the American Cold War policy towards Yugoslavia. Whoever talks about the overthrow of the current regime is actually talking about the destruction of the Yugoslav state. It's obvious that this would immediately lead to tremendous instability in the Balkans. It's highly unrealistic to expect that a group of fragmented entities, none of which is ready for independence and some of which are not even potentially capable of independence, can more successfully oppose Soviet communism in the Balkans than the extremely solid and experienced national regime that now rules over 20 million people in that area and leads one of the two largest land armies in the non-Soviet part of Europe.
Sorry for intervention. I ask you for conclusion, please. Okay.
In the 50s, as a bishop in the USA, was sided with Senator Joseph McCarthy by attacking the infiltration of communist ideas and supposedly the spies into the American establishment. According to him, the idea of containment rather than open conflict with communism led to an increasingly powerful expansion of left-wing ideas in the West. Like many other Catholic prominent people of his time, Monsignor Hurley taught that the restoration of Christian civilization would be answer to the victory over Nazism and the communism. In this venture, he gave the main role to his homeland America, but time has shown that it took the opposite path regarding political and social development. Completely disgusted with the events in America in regard to the American civil rights movement and the repercussion around the Vatican Council, Hurley died in 1967, having only hope that Poland, Catholic Poland, will break the teeth of communism, will win over Russia. He didn't live to see 1968 in America, but we can say that he predicted the mainstream of American society that will be affected by the Cultural Revolution inspired by Marxist ideas, against which he opposed it already in its primordial stage. Also in the 50s, he did a lot of publicity among American Catholics and American public to get to know the figure of Cardinal Stepinac and difficult position of the Church in Croatia and Yugoslavia. In conclusion, without any doubt, his short-term service in the Yugoslav territory left a strong impression on him. On the basis of the heavy Yugoslav experience was getting to conviction of the need for a merciless fight against communism. Not only that, it was given to him the strong attitude about how was much needed to defend Catholicism in that part of the world, as well as at Hurley's home, namely that what is less known, he also played an important role in the history of the Catholicism in Florida. Generally, he has also been evaluated in the recent times as a distinguished and a significant figure of the American Catholicism in the past century. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation and speech. And I will ask Dr. Mario Jareb from Croatian Institute of History to deliver us the last speech of this panel. And he will be focusing on the Zagreb Archbishop Alojzije Stepinac in the reports of the Western or in diplomats in Zagreb and Belgrade. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Since we are almost out of time, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. So, although the communist regime put Archbishop Stepinac on stage trial in fall of 1946, it was already before the end of World War II quite clear that communists stand towards the Catholic Church and the Archbishop was hostile. So you could learn something about that already before in the presentations of my colleagues, Josip and Stipe. So it was to be expected that once they ascend to power in entire Croatia and Yugoslavia, the communists would not hesitate to persecute the church, including the archbishop as the most prominent among Croatian and Yugoslav princes of the church. For example, already at the beginning of 1945, US agencies and diplomats could learn what communist intentions toward the church and Stepinac were. For example, in January 1945, Tito's diplomat and General Vladimir Velebit, in a conversation with the agent of the Office of War Information, its London branch, and Boardman, declared that the prestige of the Catholic Church has been heavily impaired by the collaborationist policies of the bishops of Ljubljana and Zagreb. So that was Zagreb, was of course Stepinac. In her report, Boardman expressed a kind of surprise by stating that Velebit lumped both the bishops together, though Stepinac of Zagreb has not as bad a record as the Bishop of Ljubljana. It's kind of understandable thing that she was surprised due to the fact that in the eyes of US agents, including diplomats and other staff, the image of Stepinac was quite positive they observed him as a just man, guy who was protecting those persecuted, a guy who was brave enough to pronounce in his sermons some words of opposition both to Nazi ideology and Ustaša regime in Croatia. So that's why they were surprised by Velebit's words. That image I referred to before was based on information, primarily intelligence information collected by US agencies and institutions throughout the war. Institutions like US consulate in Istanbul as the main US intelligence base for Southeastern Europe. That was, how to say, base which closely cooperated with the respective British institutions. Also, institution called Office of War Information, kind of American propaganda ministry in a way, and also Office of Strategic Services, predecessor of the Central Intelligence Agency as it became to be known after 1947. Among those who provided information about communist intentions at the beginning of 1945 was one British official, British officer, also a novelist and ardent Catholic, Evelyn Waugh, who served as a member of a British military mission during 1944 and by the beginning of 1945 in Croatia, and he could, especially during his second stay in southern Croatia, that already fell under the control of the communists in after October 1945, he could see and closely observe what was going on, and as a Catholic he was also very interested in the fate of the church in these areas of Croatia. He noticed that relations of the new communist authorities towards the church were extremely negative, so church was observed as opposition, part of the opposition to the newly established communist regime. So communist authorities tried to crush any opposition and also spread the terror by intimidating, torturing and killing numerous Catholic priests and clergymen in general. And this was all executed by the hammer of the party, or Department for the Protection of the People, or OZNA. As far as I remember, my colleague Josip yesterday mentioned what OZNA was. In brief, OZNA was a Yugoslav version of NKVD. So its activities were, how to say, modeled after the activities of the NKVD. So after his return to Great Britain from Croatia or Yugoslavia at the beginning of 1945, Evelyn Waugh was determined to spread the news about communist behavior, communist attitudes, and he was willing to do that also with American officials. So he visited, before he returned to Britain, US ambassador to the Holy See, Charles Marion Taylor, and told him about what he had seen in Croatia. And upon his return to London, he also visited the US embassy by the Royal Yugoslav government in exile and the King of Yugoslavia. And what he told them was that the partisans have begun a campaign in the newspapers against the Archbishop of Zagreb, Stepinac, who has behaved well through the war. He also added what he saw in Dubrovnik and other parts of southern Dalmatia. It is clear that the campaign against Stepinac started before the Epistle of Croatian bishops issued in Zagreb on March 24, 1945, which is sometimes taken as the proof of church's collaboration with the Ustaša regime and the cause of communist hostilities toward the church. However, aforementioned quotations as well as number of communist atrocities committed against the clergymen from fall 1944 are proof that such claims are not based on facts. It is of interest to mention that during the talk between the regent of Apostolic Nunciature in Belgrade, Bishop Joseph Patrick Hurley and Marshal Tito, which took place in February 1945, Hurley mentioned that he considered significant that Tito made no charges against Archbishop's conduct during the occupation. The end of the war resulted not only in the restoration of the Yugoslav state, now as a communist dictatorship, but also allowed the US diplomatic services to restore its activities in the country. First, by the establishment of the US Embassy in Belgrade in April 1945, which was followed by the reopening of the US consulate in Zagreb in spring 1946. Operating on the ground again, it became possible for the US diplomats, especially for those in Zagreb, to observe the situation and gather information on the situation in Croatia. It is evident from the papers of the embassy and consulate that the position of the Catholic Church and the Archbishop Stepinac were observed by US officials with special attention. Papers are showing that they relied on numerous local informants, including some oppositional politicians from the Croatian Peasant Party. They didn't hesitate to interview the Archbishop himself. Widely rich source of information was the Apostolic nuncio in Belgrade and American as well, Hurley. So we heard about that guy already before. Archbishop Stepinac was arrested by the communist regime on September 18, 1946, and put on stage trial soon thereafter. But according to US Consul in Zagreb, T.J. Hohenthal, even before that, the Catholic Church in Yugoslavia has already been seriously weakened in its struggle to survive by measures deliberately taken to that end by the regime. Early in April 1946, Stepinac told me, actually to Hohenthal, that his entire organization for teaching and disseminating news had been crippled. In subsequent conversations with the Archbishop, he emphasized the increasing seriousness of the situation brought about by confiscations of church property pursuant to the agrarian reform law, by the virtual cessation of training young priests owing to the confiscation or occupation of seminaries, by the anti-religious campaign in the public schools, by the large scale of imprisonment and slaughter of priests, and by the seizure of church printing presses. By reporting in mid-February 1946 about the aforementioned slaughter and imprisonment of priests, this time in Sarajevo, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, actually about the sentence to death by shooting of 2 priests and 2 terms of forced labor of 1 priest and 1 nun, who were charged for allegedly helping anti-communist crusaders, so the members of the opposition or armed resistance to the communist regime. US Ambassador Patterson quoted Bishop Hurley's comment that it is probably these sentences have already been executed, although as yet no information is available from Yugoslav government. Needless to say, trial practice in this country is travesty on justice. Defendants have no rights. They are held incommunicado without access to counsel during the entire period of their incarceration and are subject to torture and starvation. At trial, suborned witnesses give testimony. The accused is often denied right of counsel and even of speaking in his own defense. Case is tried before picked mob who are coached to make threatening demonstrations against accused or anyone who might dare to speak for him. Verdict is handed down according to previous decision of Communist Party. One of the most refined cruelties practiced by communist justice is that of denying all religious consolation to prisoners. Even those condemned to death are not allowed ministrations of a priest. End of quotation. As the fall 1946 was approaching, it became evident that the communist regime would act in order to suppress any opposition. At that time, it was the Catholic Church led by Stepinac, which was perceived as the only force in Yugoslavia which was resisting the regime to completely dominate all aspects of life in the country. US consul in Zagreb, T.J. Oenthal, had a chance to talk to Stepinac on his request several hours prior to his arrest on September 18, 1946. During the talk, Stepinac commented staged trial of his former secretary Šalić and former chief of Ustaša secret police Erich Lisak. According to Hohenthal, Stepinac said that Šalić-Lisak trial was travesty in real parties or communist party versus Zagreb Archbishop. That priest indicted had evidently lost nerve after 9 months confinement by OZNA. The reign of terror had commenced against clergy with 2 priests murdered in past week. The present campaign, if unobstructed, would end in exterminations of himself and all Catholic clergy in Yugoslavia. But he was confined Croats would stand firm and remain true to church. He taught concentration of Crusaders flag, so the flag of those fighters against communists. In his absence, was arranged by OZNA against provocateurs. Hohenthal testified that at that time Stepinac was certain that action would be taken against him, but he didn't expect it soon. He thought that he had another high clergy would be disposed of by mock trials, such as the present one, so that one I mentioned before. And that the lesser clergy would simply be murdered or driven from their parishes, a process which had already been in effect for some time and which had been given a new impetus by the murder of 2 priests in the preceding week. Before that, it was obvious that the purpose of aforementioned staged trial of Šalić and Lisak was to implicate archbishops and therefore church as organizer and director of Crusaders movement, which apparently mostly manned and led by former Ustaši, and which prosecution describes as terrorist movement against people and people's authority. U.S. Vice Consul in Zagreb, Peter F. Constant, who was observing the trial, concluded that state's case against Archbishop is based only on opinions solicited by prosecutor and freely given by most priest defendants. Since such defendants obviously trying to save their heads and often caught lying, their opinions patently worthless. On September 28, 1946, just before the staged trial against Stepinac resumed, U.S. Consul in Zagreb, Hohenthal, reported that lawyers Natko Katičić and Ivo Politeo were appointed Stepinac's attorneys, and they both visited him. They, as Hohenthal said, found him in a state of extreme religious exaltation and in full possession faculties. He has given answers to some questions of prosecution in writing and is resolved not to testify at trial. He told attorneys that he wished no defense made, but since they saw unfortunate as to be appointed, could act as they saw fit. Archbishop will be seated next to Lisak in court, but is prepared for all humiliations and severe sentence. Lawyers will make what the defense they can. Even before he was arrested on September 14, 1946, Stepinac stated that it was his intention not to give the regime the satisfaction on answering their questions in court and twisting his answers to their own purpose. Already in mid-October 1946, Vice Consul Peter F. Constance, who was personally observing the trial, noted that the court is not the court of justice in the American sense, but a tribunal serving through the medium of court trial whatever purpose the regime desires at any given time to have served political propaganda or punitive domestic, foreign, or international. In the circumstances, the judges, the public prosecutor, referred to the court as an instrument for dispensing justice on the basis of the accomplishment brought about by the National Liberation Movement. No evidence of any conceivable sort is prohibited to the prosecution. The defense, whether on account of fear or because of legal prohibition, rarely challenges any of the evidence or witnesses produced by the public prosecutor. Not once during this trial did the court reject any of the witnesses proposed or evidence introduced by the prosecution. Constant concluded that it's idle to speak of the trial of Archbishop Stepinac as a court trial. It was more like a melodrama performance in which the public prosecutor was the hero, the president of the court his right-hand man who did most of the work for which the hero got to applause. The defendant was the villain and the public was the clock. I came away convinced that the entire performance was staged for the fulfillment of a preconceived plan with a preconceived aim, and that this aim was the discrediting of the Catholic Church in Yugoslavia through the condemnation of the ranking authority of that church. Archbishop Stepinac and the castigation of international reaction, the two things the present Yugoslav regime undoubtedly fear most. At the same time, U.S. Consul in Zagreb Hohenthal believed that the trial must be viewed as more than an attempt by the puppet regime in Yugoslavia to rid itself of a dangerous rival. It must be regarded as the first hand-to-hand conflict between communism and the Catholic Church, and as such it is of a tremendous significance. The trial is also of significance to the United States, aside from the attempts made by innuendo to implicate the United States and other Western powers by allusions to foreign agents, imperialists, our enemies abroad, and foreign reactionary elements. The trial represents a negation of such civil liberties as fair trial and freedom of worship, and in this respect as a manifestation of the universal aims of communism. It points a threatening finger at cherished tenets and creeds as well as democratic institutions everywhere. So let me conclude that it is unusual that American diplomats in Yugoslavia, primarily those in Zagreb, followed the staged trial against Archbishop Stepinac with special attention and first-hand. Given their service, they had the opportunity to obtain a lot of information that was not the product of Yugoslav communist propaganda. That is, they exposed the true course and background of events. Several hundred pages of their reports and dispatches sent to the Secretary of the State in Washington are proof for that claim. American diplomats, especially those from the Zagreb consulate who worked on the spot, had no doubt that it was a communist attempt to eliminate the influence of the Catholic Church in the public life of Croatia at the time. They didn't even doubt the character of Stepinac's trial, which they assessed as a staged political trial. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much for your speech on the very interesting topic. And we have some couple of minutes, so we can open the discussion. 2 quick questions, if you are interested, Beata. If it is possible to pass the microphone. Okay, it's coming.
A question to Mr. Kljaić. You have touched a very important topic, which we could call the global pontificate of Pius XII and the American factor. My question is, do you really believe in any kind of political alliance between the Holy See and the United States in this period of the nascent Cold War?
This alliance was evidence in the Italian election in '46, when the American establishment in Italy and the Pope Pius XII, Eugenio Pacelli, managed to form a political party, Democrația Cristiană, Christian Democratic Party, which later won over the Communist Party in Italy. I think that Communist Party in Italy and that election, it got only third place, 30% of the parliament in Italy, and it's a great threat, not only for the American establishment in Europe, but for the Pope, for the Church, for the Vatican. And this time we can clearly see this cooperation, no? on this case, no? in Italy. And after that, this alliance would continue, no? But as you know, there are two powers, two governments, two authorities, no? And in other times, this policy was not always have the same interests, no?
Of course, it's a very complex question. And one question, if you are interested. If not, I will just ask very briefly, Peter, regarding the Bishop Gojdič. As far as I know, he died in the Leopoldo, and there is a symbolical grave over there. Okay, it's just a symbolical, because you mentioned it, but always when it's the anniversary and the commemoration of the political victims and political prisoners in the Leopoldo, this symbolical grave is one of the stay, and people used to go to pray there, so it's a huge symbol of the suffering people during the communism. Okay, thank you very much. Let me make a short proposal regarding the following program of the conference. I would also, first of all, like to thank all the panelists for their contributions, presentations, and the discussion. And now I would like to propose a short technical break, up to 10 minutes, and then we could follow with the summary of the conference. If you accept it, I hope so. So we will see here once again at 3:30.